On January 17, 1991, at 2:51 in the morning, an Iraqi radar operator in Baghdad saw something strange on his screen. A tiny blip the size of a bird, maybe smaller, crossing the sky at nearly 1,000 kilometers per hour. He tried to lock the missile system onto it. He couldn't. 3 seconds later, Baghdad's Ministry of Communications ceased to exist. Around him, at dozens of control stations across the city, the same scene was playing out. Operators trained for years stared at screens that said nothing, while the world behind them exploded and said everything. A power plant, a military communications bunker, an air defense node. One by one, like a list being crossed out by an invisible hand. That night, 27 aircraft, representing less than 3% of the total coalition air power in the region, destroyed 31% of the operation's high-value targets, without losing a single plane, without a single radar that could reliably lock on to them. This was not a standard air operation. It was a demonstration dot, and the question that lingers 3 decades later still makes engineers and generals turn it over in their minds. How do you design a plane to be invisible? What is the physics behind it? And what happened the one time this ghost was brought down? This is the story of the F-117 Nighthawk. To understand why the F-117 had to exist, you need to go back to October 1973. The world was watching another chapter of the long war between Israel and its neighbors. But this time something had changed. The Egyptians and Syrians crossed Israeli lines equipped with a Soviet novelty, the SA-6, gainful surface-to-air missile system, and the shoulder-fired SA-7 Israeli pilots. Flying F-4 Phantoms and A-4 Skyhawks, the best Western aircraft of the era, were being shot down at a terrifying rate. In just 18 days of combat, Israel lost 109 aircraft. Not to rival fighters, but to missiles fired from the ground. For Pentagon planners, the message landed like a punch to the gut. The era of conventional air superiority was over. Soviet Union had spent decades and billions of dollars building what Western analysts called the electronic Iron Curtain, an integrated network of radars, missiles, and interceptor fighters designed specifically to turn Western Europe into a graveyard for American aircraft. The USAF's internal calculations were grim. In a large-scale conflict in Europe, American air power could be virtually neutralized within weeks. The aircraft that existed, even the most sophisticated ones, were simply too large, too reflective to radar. Here's how radar works. You emit a radio wave. It travels through the air, hits something, a plane for example, and bounces back to you. The time it takes to return tells you the distance. The direction tells you where the target is. And the intensity of the return, how much energy came back, determines how easy or hard it is to lock a missile onto it. The central question for any aeronautical engineer at that moment was, how do you reduce that intensity? How do you make a plane return as little radar energy as possible? The answer, ironically, did not come from an American laboratory. Asterisk, in 1966, a Soviet mathematician named Pyotr Ufimtsev published a technical paper in radio engineering and electronic physics, a Moscow scientific journal with limited circulation. The title was dry, Method of Edge Waves in the Physical Theory of Diffraction. Ufimtsev's work proposed that it was mathematically possible to calculate the radar cross-section of any three-dimensional object from the geometry of its edges and surfaces. In other words, given any shape, you could predict exactly how much radar signal it would reflect, and more importantly, how to modify that shape to minimize the reflection. The Soviet academic establishment was unimpressed. The consensus was that those equations, however elegant, were purely theoretical. An aircraft built from flat, angled surfaces, what the equation suggested as ideal, would be aerodynamically unstable. literally incapable of flight. The paper was filed away as a mathematical curiosity, but the American scientific intelligence apparatus was meticulous. The paper was translated, circulated among analysts, and at some point reached the desk of Dini Overholser, a radar engineer at Lockheed Skunk Works in Burbank, California. Overholser read the paper and saw something the Soviets had completely missed. Ufimtsev wasn't talking about aircraft. It was talking about geometry and physics, and the equations could be programmed into a computer. Together with mathematician Bill Schroeder, Overholser wrote a program called Echo 1, capable of calculating the radar cross-section of any three-dimensional shape built from flat surfaces. You drew the shape. The program told you how visible it was to radar. In 1975, Overholser presented the results to the head of Skunk Works, the legendary Ben Rich. What the program showed was extraordinary, a specific shape resembling a faceted diamond with precisely angled surfaces could reduce an aircraft's radar signature to the level of an insect. Rich looked at the sketch and said the line that became famous around the department: "It looks like an Aztec pyramid with indigestion." The project received the internal nickname Hopeless Diamond because that thing was never supposed to fly. And why was it called hopeless? Because every design decision that reduced the radar signature created an aerodynamic nightmare. Flat, angled surfaces are the opposite of what an aircraft needs for stability. The engines couldn't have conventional air intakes. The compressor blades reflect radar like mirrors. The solution was to cover the intakes with specialized metal grids that block electromagnetic waves while still allowing air to pass through. The exhaust gases, hot enough to be detected by infrared sensors, were channeled through a flattened, wedge-shaped nozzle called by engineers the platypus tail, which spreads and cools the flow. The cockpit, faceted in shape, would have its front glass coated with an ultra-thin layer of gold, conductive enough to deflect radar waves without losing optical transparency for the pilot. The result was an aircraft so unstable that flying it without electronic assistance would be comparable to trying to balance a block of ice on its corner. The fly-by-wire system, 4 redundant computers, made corrections to the control surfaces 40 times per second. Without them, the plane would tumble out of the sky in seconds. Test pilots called it the Wobblin' Goblin. To keep the project secret during development, which took place at Area 51 facilities in the Nevada desert, all flights were conducted at night. Any component that could be sourced from an existing program was reused. The landing gear from the F-16, the F-404 engines derived from the F-A-18, environmental systems from the C-130, a Frankenstein aircraft, stitched together in the shadows. The first flight took place on June 18, 1981. The F-117 entered operational service in 1983, and for 5 years, its existence was one of the most tightly kept secrets in American military history. The public only learned it existed in 1988, when a blurry photograph was released by the Department of Defense. When Operation Desert Storm began on January 17, 1991, American planners faced a concrete problem. Baghdad was defended by what some analysts described as the 4th densest air defense network in the world, a web of more than 3,000 anti-aircraft guns, hundreds of Soviet missile systems of various generations, and interceptor fighters ready to scramble for any conventional aircraft. Flying over central Baghdad on the first night would be suicide. The plan called for destroying the central communications and command nodes, precisely the most heavily defended targets before any other aircraft entered Iraqi airspace. That task fell to the F-117's 42. Nighthawks were deployed to Saudi Arabia. Each aircraft flew alone, no escort, no electronic suppression support, no refueling accompaniment over enemy territory. Stealth was the only protection. Pilots would later describe the sensation of crossing Iraqi airspace. The Iraqi radars showed clearly on the aircraft's warning display that they were active, that they were sweeping, that their signals were arriving and passing through, but never locking on. It was like being invisible inside a storm that everyone could feel, but no one could see that the F-117's primary weapon was the GBU-27, a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb. The system allowed the pilot to designate a specific point, a window, a door, a ventilation shaft, and the bomb would track that point with precision of less than a meter. There was footage that circulated around the world during the war, a bomb descending directly through a building's ventilation shaft. The precision was so unusual it looked like cinema, but it was real, and it was that precision that allowed the F-117 to operate in urban environments without the civilian casualties that conventional heavy bomber attacks would have caused. The psychological impact on the defenders was profound. Iraqi soldiers who survived the conflict would later report that the most terrifying threat wasn't the sound of aircraft, it was the silence. You only knew a Nighthawk had passed when something exploded. There was no warning, no siren, no chance to evacuate. By the end of the war, the 42 F-117s had completed 1,271 missions without losing a single aircraft. Representing 2.5% of total Allied aircraft, they were responsible for striking 31% of high-priority targets. But then we come to 1,999, and the story got more complicated. March 27, 1999, the United States and NATO had launched Operation Allied Force 3 days earlier, an aerial bombing campaign against Yugoslavia during the Kosovo crisis. Colonel Zoltan Dani commanded the 3rd Battalion of the 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade of the Yugoslav Army, equipped with SA-3 NEVA systems, a technology from the 1960s, considered obsolete by Western standards. Dani knew he had no way to compete with modern American systems head-on, so he didn't try to play the same game. Instead of keeping his radars on, which would make them immediate targets for American anti-radiation missiles, he used them in very short, unpredictable bursts. He studied the routing patterns of NATO aircraft over the first days of the operation, and he noticed something crucial. The F-117, when it opened its bomb bay to release munitions, briefly altered its radar signature. For a fraction of a second, the ghost became slightly less invisible. That night, the Nighthawk, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko, was on a routine mission. Dani switched on his radar at precisely the calculated moment. He saw the return. He launched 2 SA-3 missiles. Zelko felt the aircraft take a hit. With extraordinary skill, he maintained enough control to eject safely. He was rescued hours later by American Special Operations Forces. The F-117, serial number 820806, came down in a field near Bajanovki, Serbia. Local residents poured into the streets. Dani became a Yugoslav national hero, and the Western world was left in shock. The aircraft everyone believed was invulnerable had been brought down by a Soviet-era system. The lesson the incident taught was uncomfortable, but essential for future development. Stealth is not total invisibility. It is a probabilistic advantage, not an absolute guarantee. A sufficiently patient, intelligent, and creative adversary, using unconventional methods, can find gaps in any system. American engineers responded to the incident with direct improvements. More varied mission patterns, reduced route predictability, and an acceleration in the development of the B-2 Spirit and the future F-22 systems that take stealth to a completely different level. Zelko and Dani curiously met years later. In a 2011 documentary, the two, who had become unlikely friends, discussed at night in detail Zelko said he had deep respect for what Danny had accomplished. Danny said he was relieved to learn that Zelko had survived. There is something deeply human in this story, within the story. Two professionals on opposite sides of a conflict, acknowledging each other's excellence decades later. Asterisk, the F-117 was officially retired in April 2008. At the ceremony, the last 4 Nighthawks flew over Holloman Air Force Base in formation. Then they disappeared into the Neva Desert. But there is a curious detail. Retired does not necessarily mean grounded. The GIUN National Defense Authorization Act requires the Air Force to maintain the F-117s in a state of preservation that would allow them to return to service within 6 months if necessary. And there are documented sightings of Nighthawks flying over Nevada on a regular basis, including photos and videos captured by civilians in recent decades. The most widely accepted theory is that they are used as realistic, stealthy targets to train intercept pilots and test next generation radar systems. The F-117's technical legacy is immense. It proved definitively that very low radar signature aircraft could be safely and effectively operated in real combat. That proof opened a direct path to the B-2 Spirit, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-35 Lightning II, which today forms the backbone of Western combat aviation. But perhaps the deepest legacy is conceptual. The F-117 changed the way wars are fought and the way they are planned. The idea that you can surgically strike only the targets that matter, with minimum exposure and collateral damage, has redefined American military doctrine for the past 3 decades. Of course, that brings its own ethical and strategic questions about what low cost of conflict means for decision makers, about the proliferation of similar technologies in other countries, about the future of warfare in the electromagnetic and digital domain. But those are conversations for another video. What we can say with confidence is this: a Soviet mathematician published a paper his own government ignored. American engineers took those equations and built in absolute secrecy an aircraft that should never have been able to fly, and made it fly. A Yugoslav colonel with decades-old equipment and tactical intelligence shot that aircraft down in 1999, and the response to that single failure produced an entire generation of even more sophisticated aircraft. The story of the F-117 is not a story of perfection. It is a story of solving impossible problems, and of what happens when you refuse to accept that something cannot be done. If you made it this far, you probably have questions. Good, that's exactly how it should be. If this kind of story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, which aspect of the F-117 do you want us to dig into further? The technology, the operational history, Kosovo, or the lives of the pilots who flew it? Thanks for watching. See you on the next mission.